So another improvised patch tutorial. Also today I will try to build a patch from scratch and while concentrating on a specific module. Today we have the VCV Process module that has multiple functions that we will explore. You can see I have here also a few ideas that I would like to explore with you. Again, I will try to keep this as beginner friendly as I can, taking everything step by step. So let's start. I want to start here with the slew function, right? We have multiple functions here. We have sample and hold, also a shift register. We'll see this later on, track and hold and track, slew and glide. And I want to start with the slew limiting. So let's start with building a simple sequence, maybe just so we have something to work with. Right, so I will use the sec3, we looked at it already in a previous video, also the quantizer, we looked at it in the previous video. I'm going to quantize the first row here to a specific scale or specific nodes, right? And I will use the VCO1. For now, let's keep this simple and try to make things a bit more complex later on. Right, so now I can control, right, I have the first row of the sec3 going through the quantizer, so I can quantize this, I can correct this voltage to certain notes, and then this goes to the volt per octave input of the VCO, so we can control the pitch, the notes of the VCO now with the first row. I'm going to take the tempo here, the BPM a bit higher. Right, and maybe instead of 8 steps, let's go with 7 steps, just because it's a bit more interesting. Right, maybe something like this. Right, so we have a simple voice to work with, and the first thing I would like to show you is how we can create smooth modulation. Smooth modulation together with the slew limiter. So the slew limiter, what it will do, it will basically take a rigid waveform, we will see this also in a second, and we'll smoothen it out, creating a transition between the different values. Instead of the values jumping from one place to another, it will transition the voltage, it will create transition between the different steps of the voltage, and this works great also for modulation purposes. Right, so for example, let's try and modulate something here. We looked in the previous videos, we looked at the process module, not the process, sorry, the rescale module, right? And we saw that we can use it to create timbre changes with wave folding. Right, so if I send this triangle wave, let's bring this back to -12, this triangle wave first to rescale, and we will look at this also on the scope. Right, I can change in the right-click menu the gain multiplier. So instead of going from minimum to maximum, it will go from minimum to multiplied by 10. So the maximum now is 10 times as high. And I'm going to reflect at maximum and reflect at minimum. Again, we looked at it in a previous video, which means that now we get the wave will go to a specific limit, and then from there it will fold itself back down. Now the limits I would like to have positive, negative 5 volts, so it's not too loud and it's not too quiet, right? It doesn't have to be exact, but let's say something like this. Right, and now when I start adding gain, right, for now we get nothing, but when I reach the limits of 5 volts, negative, positive 5 volts, it will start folding back into itself. Right? So what we can do, we can modulate this. Now, we can modulate the gain. Now, the gain is no CV input. Let me take this down for a second. And maybe we don't need the scope anymore, right? The gain is no CV input, but we can use another module to control the amplitude of the signal, which is a VCA. Right, so if I send the triangle wave first through the VCA, we can control its amplitude with the VCA, right? And then we can decide also how much we are going to fold the signal. So let's say something like this. Let's go also with lower notes, actually, you know, instead of going positive in this row, I will go negative a bit. Right, so we have lower notes. The 8th step we don't need, we have just 7 steps. Right, and now I can use the second row of the sequence to control the VCA, right? So if I connect it, the VCA will close, and now we have sort of a velocity control, right? And also how much folding we get. The higher the level, the more the wave will be folded, right? So let's say the first step I would like to have full, and then maybe the fourth and the sixth. Right, so we have this rhythm, and I want to show you this already also on the scope. Right, so we can look at the waveform, and then in between, right, in between we will have lower velocity, let's say. Right, so we have some dynamics. And you can see here on the scope, you can see this quite clearly, right? The values jump from one, if I stop this for a second, right? They jump, they jump almost instantaneously, right? From one point to another, right? If it's from up, down, or down, up, right? They jump basically from one value to another. And we can also hear this, that the VCA is also jumping from one point to another, and we get these clicks in the sound. Right, so a very simple thing what I can do already with the process module. We have one here that I didn't use yet. With the process module, I can send this sequence, this modulation sequence, through the slew. Right, this will go to the input, and then from the slew output, right, we can now smoothen out. Is smoothen out a real word? I don't know, but we can smoothen out this signal. Look at the scope, what happens. Now we need to go like this. Right, look at this. Right, this was without. And now I start adding slew. Already here we get rid of the clicks. And instead of now jumping from one place to another, we are now transitioning between the values. Right, according to the slew time. Right, again, without. And now with. Right, so already we can use process to smoothen out rigid signals. I'm going to add some effects to this because this is way too dry. So let's do this. I will use again the Venom mixer, the stereo mixer, right? This mixer is very similar to the VCV, where is it? The VCV mixer, the VCA mix. Right, it's similar, but it's stereo, which is what I want in this case. Right, so the mix will go to the output, and now I will add maybe a... Let's go with the stereo delay from Surge XT. Right, and I will want also some reverb. I will take again Galaxy from Sapphire, so we have delay and reverb. Right, if I want, I can also sync the delay to the clock. Right, and then let's go with... Right, something like this, a bit more reverb. A bit more brightness on the reverb. More levels. Right, just so we have some effects. Right, we will change, the sequence will also change later on, I guess. It will not stay something like this repetitive. Right, but now what we've done already is adding modulation to the VCA, and actually by doing this also to the wave folding. Right, and we created a transition between the values, so it's not jumping from one value to another, it's more transitioning from one value to another. Now, another thing that is common to do with the slew limiter is adding glide or portamento to the notes. And you know what, maybe before I continue, let's really change this sequence because it's getting a bit too repetitive. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to use another sec3. Or you know what, instead of a sec3 I will just use another sort of small sequencer, I guess. Right, so I'm going to use the ADDR sequencer from Bog Audio, right? It's a simple 8-step sequence by default. And I'm going to clock this from the trigger output of the sec3. Now I don't want it to run together with the sec3, I want it to run slower. So what I can do, for example, if I turn off most of the notes, if I leave just the 1 and the 5, not the clock, the 1 and the 5, right, we get now basically a divided clock, right, divided by 4, I guess, right, because we have every 4 triggers we have a clock, so it will run slower. And now here we have 7 steps on the sec3, so on this ADDR let's have, for example, just 4 steps, right, so they are also meeting, they will meet each other at different points in time. And now I'm just going to mix this, right, with the CV mix. I'm going to mix the sec3 before the quantizer, right, and I'm going to change one step here, for example, of the ADDR, and send this to another channel and mix it together. Right, so we have some variation. And actually it's not divided by 4 because here we don't have 8 steps, we have just 7 steps. So what I can do, I can even remove this step and maybe just create a rhythm. Right, so it will always happen at a different point in time when we have some variation to this sequence. This was a bit too boring, maybe take the gain even higher. We have something brighter a bit, right, just so we have more variation to the sequence. So now let's go back to the second process here. So what we have here, in this case, it's a common technique to send pitch information through a slew limiter to create portamento. So if I send, and I'm going to use another scope here, if I send the pitch information first again through process and I use the slew output, right, maybe I can zoom in a bit, just so we can see this better, this one here. Right, you can see pitch information is basically a sequence going up and down, jumping from one point to another. If I send this through the slew, after the quantizer in this case, if I take the effects a bit down, right, you can hear now the pitch is not jumping from one note to another, but it's transitioning. There is slew between the notes. But a nice thing about the process module is that we have also the glide output. Now the glide output will work a bit differently than the slew. It will also add slew or portamento or glide in this case, but here it needs a gate to tell it when to start working. So if instead of the slew output I use the glide output, I can add as much slew as I want, nothing will happen. Right, as long as a gate in this input is not active. So only when a gate is active, when a gate is high at the input, and you will see in a second it doesn't have to be just a gate. But if there is no signal high in this input, nothing will happen. I can use the push button here to activate it. Only when the button is active we get slew. If I turn it off, right, we get no slew. Right, now again it says here gate input. What it means is basically that when a signal in this input is high enough, I believe in the case of VCV Rack, higher than 1 volt. So any signal that comes, and I will show you this, you know what, any signal that comes in this input doesn't have to be a gate. It can be a clock, it can be a sequence, it can be an LFO, whatever you want to use. Just because it says gate doesn't mean you have to use a gate. If I just use offset, right, and we can look at this also on the scope. I see already this video is going to be longer than usual, right? But you can see on the scope, when I take the offset up, right, still we get nothing, still we get nothing, still we get nothing. We go above 1 volt. Right? Let's see again when it is exactly. 1, still not enough. Still not enough, so it's 2 volts, I guess. Yes, so you see here we have 2 volts. So whenever there's a signal higher than 2 volts at the gate input, the slew will start working. Now you can use a gate. You can use a gate, but we can use another row of the sequencer to tell the glide exactly on which steps you want it to work. So if I use CV3, send it to the gate input, again, just because it says a gate doesn't mean you have to use a gate signal. Right, and let's say that I want this to happen just on those 2 notes. Right? So now we have glide or portamento just on these steps. Right, and we get some variation. Of course, you know what we can do? We can take this even further and use another ADDR sequencer. Right, another ADDR sequencer, and in this case, instead of 7 steps, it will have 8 steps, and it will run with the same clock as the SEC3. And then we will use this ADDR to control when it will happen. So for example, I can take the first 2 steps. Right, the first 2 steps I took this to maximum, so it will activate the glide, and because this has 8 steps and the SEC3 has 7 steps, we always get 2 different notes that will glide between one another. Right, so again we have some variation. Right, so again, let me take the effects a bit up a bit and this down. Right, so again, what we have here, we have first of all, we took rigid signal like a modulation sequence, right, that was here, right, the second row of the SEC3, and we turned it into a smooth modulation source, right, which is also in sync with the SEC3 because it comes basically from the SEC3, and we added also glide or portamento only on 2 specific steps of the sequence, and we created variation by using different sequences. So one ADDR will transpose the pitch, but it runs differently than the SEC3, and another ADDR will activate the glide, and again it runs differently than the SEC3. So we get some variation. It's not so repetitive as it was before. Now let's move on to another function here on the process module, that is track and hold. So let's create another sequence. I will use another gate, another SEC3. Run it with the same clock, right? We can connect a clock, run, and reset. So now they both, if you know what, I can connect the reset also to the ADDR sequencers. So now when I stop the main SEC3 and I start it again, everything will start from the same point. Right, so now we have another another SEC3. Let's have another voice. I'm going to use another VCO. And in this case, I want it to be more percussive. So let's use VCO, VCA, and envelope. Right, let's go. And you know what? Let's add also a filter here to make this even more percussive. We will create a classic subtractive voice. So we will have VCO, a filter, a VCA, and two envelopes, right? So we take a saw wave, let's say this will go to a low pass filter, from the filter to the VCA, so we can control its amplitude. We will control its amplitude with an envelope, and we will control the filter with another envelope, right? So we have here a classic subtractive synth voice oscillator, low pass filter or filter, and a VCA and two envelopes, one for the amplitude, one for the filter. And now this we will send to another channel here on the mixer. And now I will use, for example, the triggers or the gates in this case, to gate both envelopes that should be quite percussive. Right, and then for the filter, it will be even a shorter envelope. Right, so you can see, you can hear. It's a bit more percussive, right, because of the envelope, of the filter envelope. And now let's say that I don't want, let's keep it like this for now, okay? And change also, we can control also the notes with the quantizer, again, use the first row. And in this case, let's go with something that goes up a bit. Now another thing I would like to do, I would like the filter also to open with higher notes, because now the higher notes don't go through, right? So what we can do, we can mix the envelope, the filter envelope, again I will use the CV mix. We can mix the envelope right, with the pitch information, with the sequence. Right, so now the higher the notes, the more the filter will open and will let these notes through, because higher notes, higher frequency, low pass filter will not let high frequency through, depending on the cutoff. But if we control the filter with the notes, we can let the higher notes through from the filter. Right, so for now let's leave it like this. Maybe we will change things later on, but what I want to show you here is the track and hold. So let me show you this for a second separately. I will stop this sequence, or maybe I will stop the main sequence, that's better. I would like to show you this separately. So we have here an LFO, right, that I'm going to send to the input of the process module, and then from the track and hold output, the T and H track and hold, this will go back to the scope. Now you can see for now we just get the LFO, and the track and hold will first of all track the signal. It will let it through until we activate a gate at the input, and then it will hold the signal at a specific amplitude that it was on. Right, so for now it just lets the LFO through. Now if I'm going to click this button and hold it and see what happens. Now the LFO is not going through anymore. All we have now is this amplitude of the LFO that the track and hold is basically holding until I release the gate, and then the LFO goes back through again. Right, I can click it at different places, right, and it will hold the LFO at different amplitudes depending when I have this gate open. So this is track and hold. It will track the signal when it receives a gate, and as long as the gate is open. And again, just because it says a gate doesn't mean you have to use a gate, as we've seen before. But as long as the gate is open or the signal is high at the gate input, the value of the LFO will be held at the time that you open the gate. Right? Track and hold. In this case of the process module, we have also the opposite. We have hold and track. And I believe in this case, we will also use this for something else. So I will show you this later on. But basically, it's the same, just inverted. Instead of track and hold, it will first hold. And then when a gate goes high, it will track. Right? So when I push the button, now the LFO goes through. When I let go of the button, it will hold. So it basically It's basically inverted as track and hold. We have track and hold and track. In hardware, by the way, sometimes it's called track and hold, but it's actually the inverted. But there are two different things, track and hold and track. And we will use both of them. So in this case, we're going to start with track and hold. And I want to show you, for example, what you can do with it. If I start the sequence again, right, I can add, maybe I have it already here. I have here already another process. No, I can use the track and hold with the process module to gate the sequence. Right, so for example, if I use, in this case, let's go with the gates, right? If I send the gates, let me put this here then. If I send the gates first through the process module and then from the track and hold back to both envelopes, right? Nothing happens. When I push the button, nothing goes through. Right, nothing goes through. And we can, like this, gate the sequence. Now I'm going to take this actually a step further and make this even better. What I will do is this. Instead of using the gates, I'm going to leave the gates, Control-Shift to get a duplicate of the cable. I'm going to connect this, and what I'm going to gate the clock. Instead of gating the triggers or the gates, I'm going to send the clock first through the track and hold. And now when I click the button, the gate doesn't go through, the sequence stops. And like this I can gate the sequence. Right, now again, just because it says a gate input doesn't mean you have to use a gate. I'm going to use another ADDR sequencer. And I'm going to use, for example, maybe again I'm going to use the, oh, you know what we can do here? I'm going to show you another example of why just because it says a gate doesn't mean you have to use a gate. In this case it says a clock, right? But again, it just means a signal above a certain level will advance the sequence. So I'm going to use the third row of the first sec3 to advance it because I want a different rhythm here. I don't want these steps, right? Let's say that I want 2 and let's say that I want 5, right? So now just on these steps, and you can see this here, the sequence will advance. Just because it says gate or clock or whatever doesn't mean you have to use a specific module with a specific function. You don't have to use a specific clock module or a specific gate module. You can use other modules, other signals. So now we have this running again. Also here I will reset things just in case when needed. Right, and now what I will do, I will set this, for example, to, let's leave it at 8 steps, and this will gate the track and hold. And now let's say 2 and 4 and 5, and let's say 7. Right? Now we are gating the sequence. It's not always running, it's starting, it's stopping. Right, and we get a bit more variation. And actually, you know what, maybe also 8 I will open. So we get just sorts of bursts of the sequence, right? So it's not always running, it's not always repetitive. Let me also change the decay here, or not change, but sequence the decay of the envelope, just so we have again some variation. Right, something like this. And then also here, let's add some effects. Let's use a mono delay. Okay, let's do this. I will use a mono delay. And then send this through the VCV fade module, just so we can create panning modulation. and this will go to another reverb. Okay, let me show you exactly what's going on here. Just a second. Right, so I have here a delay first of all. Right, maybe a longer delay. Right, a bit more feedback. We need a bit more levels. Maybe something like this. Right, and now it goes to the fade module, it goes to input 1, and I'm using output 1 and 2 all the way to the left. Opalach, it will be panned to the left, all the way to the right. It will be panned to the right, so we can add also panning modulation. And you know what I can do? I'm going to use another process module and another row of the sec3, right? Again, through the slew, just like we've seen before. Open the attenuverter all the way. So now with the third row, I can choose exactly the panning. So for example, here I want it all the way left, here all the way right, here a bit. Right, something like this. And again, instead of it jumping from one place to another, I can add slew to it. Right, and now we have panning modulation, smooth panning modulation with some reverb. More brightness. Maybe a bit smaller in this case. Right, I will add the first voice. Right, so again, with the track and hold, now we are gating the clock that clocks the sec3, which means that now the sec3 is not always running, it's not always driving all the time. We are gating it with another sequencer thanks to the track and hold. It will track to let the clocks through until we tell it not to let it through, until we tell it to hold the signal. Now this works really nicely also for modulation. So let me take now the voices again out a bit. And let's again create a drone, because this modulation with the drone can be quite nice. So I will use 1, 2, and 3 VCOs. I think I've done this before in the last videos a few times. Right, we're going to use, let's say, a saw and then 2 square waves. This will go to a low pass filter. For now, let's just send this here through. Right, and let's have the saw wave, let's say 2 octaves down. Now by default, as I mentioned in previous videos, most oscillators in VCV Rack are tuned to the note C4. If I right click the frequency and I enter C2, this will be 2 octaves down. From C4 we go to C2. Right, and then the square waves will be tuned an octave down to C3. But I will hold Control and Shift so I can detune them just a bit from one another. Let me show you what will happen. Right now they are more or less perfectly in tune, but if I detune them, right, we get this movement together with the bass. Right, so this will be what we will modulate, the cutoff point. Right, and with the hold and track in this case, we are going to create modulation that is also gated. Let me show you this again on the scope. Right, let's use an LFO for example. Right, I'm going to send, let's say, a triangle wave, in this case through the hold and track to the filter. Right, and now only when I open the gate, the modulation will actually go through. Maybe I will make this a bit quicker. Right, so we can like this gate also modulation. So again, maybe in this case we have something, we have no row here, free. Let's see how we can do this. You know what? I'm going to do this. No, I want this synced. Let me think just for a second what we can do best. Okay, I'm going to show you something interesting. So I'm going to use another LFO, a bit slower LFO. Right, and I'm going to use the square output to gate the main LFO. And what I will do, I will use the rhythm that we have here from the same trigger output that we have here from the first sec3 to reset this LFO. Let me show you this also on the scope. I told you we'll use many scopes in this session. And actually I will show you this with a different waveform, let's say with a triangle waveform. And I'm going to reset it with this trigger output. Right, you can see the waveform we are getting. Right, we get something a bit more interesting. And of course, because I'm using here the square output that I can also show you on the second channel here on the scope, the length of the gate will also very much have control on how long the LFO is actually going through, right? Because as long as the gate is high, the LFO will go through. So if I make this shorter, now we get an interesting rhythm. And it's also more or less related to the sequence because we are using the sequence to reset the LFO, right? This scope we don't need anymore. Let's listen to this with the other voices, see if it's successful. Right? We get another rhythm. We can add some resonance and drive. Right, so we have a gated clock with a track and hold, we have gated modulation with the hold and track. And I want to show you also the sample and hold, which is the last function here on process. And of course, what I want you to do is, I want you to go and experiment with other things also, gate other things with track and hold, use other sources to slew or with the glide, right? Go and experiment with this, but let's have a look now at the sample and hold. And again, I'm going to mute the other voices just so we can concentrate on this for a second. Okay, so what a sample and hold will do, I think we spoke about this a few times in the last videos, but let's see this again. So the sample and hold is similar to track and hold, or I should say track and hold is similar to sample and hold. If I send an LFO to the process module and I take the sample and hold output, right, you see nothing happens. So in this case, we have no tracking, it will not let anything through. The sample and hold will take snapshots of an incoming signal when it receives a gate or a trigger. In this case, the length of the gate doesn't matter. Just as long as the gate is high or a trigger is high at the input, the sample and hold will take a snapshot of the signal and will output this voltage. Right, so if I click it once, right now it took a snapshot at negative 1.3. If I click it again, it took a snapshot at positive 2.4. If I click this quickly, you can see, I will try as quick as I can, we get more or less the shape of the LFO. If I show you this maybe with a different color, right, if I click this quickly as I can, right, you see we get more or less the shape of the LFO because it will take snapshots, in this case, of the LFO, which is the signal. Now, as you can see, we have sample and hold 1 and sample and hold 2. We have here, it's called a shift register, which acts similarly as sample and hold, so it's the same as sample and hold. It will also take a snapshot of a signal when it receives a trigger, but with each trigger, it will also shift the values to the outputs. In this case, we have just 2 outputs or a second output. Again, I will use a different color for this. Right, so you can see now if I click the button here, the green trace move to a new place, and the blue trace will go to where the green trace once were. Basically delayed by one trigger. So with one trigger, the sample and hold one will receive a new value from the LFO. It will take a snapshot of the LFO, and with the next trigger, it will move this value to the sample and hold 2 while getting here a new value. Right? Again, we have here, if I click this once, you will see now the blue line will go to the green line, and the green line will get a new value. Right? You see it quite clearly. And again, if I click it again, the blue line will go up, in this case, to the green line, and the green line will get a new value. Right, so we have a 2-channel shift register, which is a sample and hold. It will take snapshots of an incoming signal, and with each trigger, it will shift the values throughout the outputs. In this case, we have just a second output. A nice thing you can do with this is you can create harmony or additional sequences with something with pitch you already have. So I'm going to use, for example, the first sequence here after the quantizer. I want to use already the corrected voltage. Right, I'm going to sample, I'm going to take snapshots of this sequence, and I'm going to have two voices harmonizing each other, because again, we have two outputs that are delayed from one another by one trigger, because each trigger shifts the value further through the outputs. So if I'm going to use two VCOs, for example, sample and hold 1 will go to one of them, sample and hold 2 will go to the second one, right? So we have now two different notes that are coming from the main sequence, but there are two notes, right? And I'm going to send this left and right, let's say, with two triangle waves, just for fun here. Triangle, triangle. Right, and I'm going to click a few times just to sample the sequence. On the left, if you are with headphones, we have one note. On the right, we have a different note. If I click this again, the one on the left will go to the right. Again, it's a shift register. It will shift it. And on the left, we get a new note. Right, and like this, we can create sort of harmony, if you will, from a sequence you already have. So what I need, first of all, I will bring back wait a minute, before I bring back everything, I'm just going to send this through a reverb. I think this video is already long enough. I'm just going to send this through a reverb just so we can enjoy this. Right? And then bring this up and bring back the first sequences, or all the sequences. And the bass. Right, and now listen to this. Maybe even more. Right, so all I need is a way to trigger this and change the notes. So I'm going to use the first output of the second sec3, which is gated, don't forget, with the track and hold. And this will trigger the change in notes. And what I will do, just to make this a bit brighter here, I'm going to use the stereo filter from Surge XT. And instead of two triangle waves, I'm going to use two saw waves. Now we have also harmony with the help of the sample and hold. I'm pretty sure that in future videos we will go back to sample and hold and look at more uses of it. But for now, all I will do is I will use the VCV random module. That, by the way, has built-in slew limiting, built-in smoothing. I will show you this also on the scope. Right, we have here the smooth output. I will use this to modulate the filter. And then with this shape, I can take this up and smooth the signal. Right, and now we have smooth random voltage controlling the filter here. Right, maybe a bit slower. Right, and we have a nice patch. I'm sorry this video was so long, but you can watch it in different parts. There are timestamp links in the description. Hopefully I remember to put them, so you can jump around and see what you find interesting. Again, the process module, we have slew limiting, we have glide, so only when an incoming gate, which doesn't have to be just a gate as we've seen, is high, it will slew the signal. We have track and hold, we have hold and track, we have sample and hold, the shift register. So many functions in one relatively small module. Really a great utility module. If you want to have a fixed track, you can just have a couple of them and use them. But this was it for today. I hope this was somewhat helpful. Thank you again so much for watching. Cheers.